Long before Britain shaped global finance, it discovered something stronger than currency, armies, or diplomacy combined. It realized that whoever resolved economic disputes controlled the foundations upon which commerce truly existed internationally. This revelation transformed Britain from a trading nation into the world's courtroom, where capitalism pleaded its cases. Thus began the rise of the money courts, the quiet empire ruling markets through judgment instead of force. Merchants in medieval London understood trade required fairness, predictability, and enforceable promises across uncertain distances. Without trusted courts, contracts meant nothing, and commerce collapsed beneath suspicion, fraud, or unpunished betrayal. Britain built courts not to punish criminals, but to stabilize transactions by guaranteeing reliable resolution mechanisms. This approach separated Britain from rivals, turning legal certainty into an early competitive financial advantage quickly. When merchants disputed deals, judges examined ledgers, letters, weights, cargo manifests, and intention behind contractual language. These early judgments shaped commercial norms, constructing a legal architecture future markets would eventually adopt broadly. London became known as a place where truth wasn't political, but mathematical, documented, and commercially rational. Businessmen trusted British courts because outcomes followed logic, not bribery, influence, or royal preference anywhere else. As trade expanded across seas, the need for universal legal authority increased faster than governments anticipated dramatically. Ships crossed jurisdictions, cultures, laws, and traditions, creating conflicts local courts couldn't resolve fairly or consistently. Britain built maritime courts, interpreting international disputes through principles merchants respected more than national pride. Thus, British rulings travelled further than British ships, shaping commercial norms for distant markets worldwide effortlessly. Foreign traders arrived in London voluntarily, submitting cases because domestic courts lacked credibility or impartial enforcement. They preferred British judgment even when rulings went against them, valuing fairness over local patriotic bias. This reputation attracted more litigants, creating a feedback loop that strengthened London's legal authority substantially. Britain didn't seize legal power. The world handed it over willingly through trust earned meticulously. Insurance disputes shaped the next evolution, as British courts interpreted risk clauses with exceptional mathematical precision consistently. Judges examined storms, piracy, delays, weather patterns, navigation charts, and crew behavior to determine rightful accountability. These decisions created precedents, forming the backbone of global insurance law used across continents today. Thus, Britain transformed uncertainty into structured responsibility, giving merchants confidence to explore oceans without hesitation. When banks emerged, courts adapted quickly, crafting rules for promissory notes, bills of exchange, collateral, and credit enforcement. Every financial instrument needed legal clarity, and Britain provided definitions shaping transactions for centuries thereafter. Ambiguity disappeared because British rulings established permanent standards governing how many move safely anywhere. Thus, finance grew atop legal pillars sturdy enough to withstand international economic turbulence without collapsing unexpectedly. Colonial expansion amplified London's legal influence because British courts governed commercial disputes involving multiple territories. Contract breaches, lost cargo, unpaid loans, or fraudulent documentation all returned to London for impartial resolution. No other empire achieved such coordinated legal coherence across diverse regions under a single interpretive system effectively. Legal structure became empire structure, binding colonies through judicial consistency independent of political authority entirely. Merchants realized British courts understood commerce better than colonial administrators or local governments struggling with complexity. Judges studied trade flows, crop yields, ship schedules, and market cycles to understand motivations behind contested agreements accurately. Thus, legal decisions mirrored economic reality, not rigid doctrine or arbitrary cultural interpretations prevalent elsewhere. London became a sanctuary for rational commerce, protecting trade with a sophistication unmatched globally anywhere. During the Industrial Revolution, disputes shifted from maritime cargo toward machines, patents, mining rights, and factory obligations. Britain adapted instantly, rewriting commercial law to protect innovation, contracts, and industrial investment from emerging risks. Judges examined engineering diagrams, machinery breakdown patterns, and wage disputes with modern analytical competency. The law evolved into a living instrument supporting industry, commerce, and rising financial complexity simultaneously. As stock markets emerged, British courts crafted rules for securities, corporate governance, shareholder rights, and fraudulent manipulation. These rules stabilized markets that otherwise suffered chaos from speculation unchecked or dishonest internal practices. London's exchanges flourished because investors trusted British legal systems to protect wealth efficiently and impartially. Thus, global finance gravitated toward Britain, seeking safety in legal predictability unmatched by rival jurisdictions worldwide. Foreign nations attempted replicating British commercial courts, but lacked the centuries-old precedents, shaping nuanced interpretation. Without historical continuity, their rulings lacked authority, consistency, and international credibility required for global trust. Thus, litigants continued choosing London long after establishing domestic financial institutions, claiming equal sophistication publicly. Heritage became advantage, a library of cases no nation could duplicate or replace through new legislation. When telecommunications accelerated decision-making, multinational companies needed fast, reliable, cross-border legal frameworks urgently. They required courts interpreting contracts involving multiple currencies, languages, timelines, and international regulatory environments simultaneously. Only Britain's courts possessed the precedent depth necessary to interpret these complexities without paralysis or contradiction. Thus, the money courts expanded influence, governing disputes shaping corporations larger than many sovereign nations today. Arbitration became London's ultimate weapon, offering faster private resolution using principles deeply rooted in British common law. Corporations preferred arbitration because it protected confidentiality, reduced cost, and delivered internationally enforceable outcomes. Arbitrators trained in British legal logic became global referees for trillion-dollar industries competing across continents fiercely. Thus, London controlled commercial peace, preventing corporate conflicts from destabilizing global markets through judicial clarity. Even when empire collapsed, corporations and nations continued writing governed by English law into contracts instinctively. This phrase ensured trust, stability, and predictable outcomes regardless of geopolitical shifts or domestic political upheaval. Thus, Britain continued shaping global commerce long after losing territorial control or economic dominance officially. Its legal system outlived colonialism, becoming the empire's longest-lasting and most profitable legacy quietly. Shipping companies, oil firms, banks, tech corporations, and investment funds still choose London courts voluntarily today. They fear uncertainty abroad more than unfavorable rulings in Britain, valuing stability above nationalistic sentiment globally. This obedience proves Britain built an empire of judgment, not geography, an empire with no visible borders. Its territory consists of contracts, precedents, obligations, and clauses the world adheres to willingly. The deeper reason behind London's dominance lies not just in legal expertise, but in institutional character objectively. British courts resist political pressure, bribery, intimidation, and emotional judgment with near unmatched stubbornness. This resistance convinces global investors that fairness survives regardless of government change or ideological turbulence surrounding. Thus, Britain's judiciary became a lighthouse for capitalism, illuminating safe passage through storms threatening global commerce. As financial markets grew more complex, judges expanded their understanding of derivatives, swaps, and structured loans carefully. They studied arcane instruments with diligence, ensuring rulings reflected deep comprehension rather than superficial evaluation. This intellectual commitment reassured trading houses that Britain could interpret even the most opaque financial mechanisms. Thus, London became indispensable, the only forum trusted to resolve disputes involving modern financial engineering confidently. Behind the scenes, law firms became Britain's new merchant class, exporting legal expertise like a valuable national commodity. They advised corporations, governments, hedge funds, and sovereign wealth entities navigating contractual complexities worldwide. These firms extended Britain's influence by embedding English law in international agreements at staggering scale. Thus, private lawyers carried empire's legacy into boardrooms, ministries, and treaty negotiations across continents daily. Corporations structured deals around British court precedents, ensuring favorable interpretive outcomes long before disputes emerged. This pre-engineering of contracts shaped global behavior, bending international commerce toward British legal reasoning naturally. Thus, influence occurred before conflict, not after judgment, proving Britain dictated rules before enforcing them. Control through foresight replaced control through authority, shifting power into invisible yet unbreakable intellectual architecture. Britain discovered final truth. Armies win territory, but courts win obedience. Navies control seas, but law controls systems. Commerce cannot function without trust, and trust cannot exist without predictable adjudication consistently applied. Thus, London became the world's governor not through ruling nations, but through ruling agreements binding them. And as global capitalism expanded, a fundamental question emerged: why did every major dispute, crisis, or corporate war inevitably lead back to London? The answer lay buried in centuries of precedent, consistency, and economic logic woven into British jurisprudence. Britain built a kingdom of clauses, a dominion of definitions, an empire constructed entirely from words. By the 20th century, Britain's money courts were no longer merely legal institutions, resolving commercial disputes fairly. They had become the operating system for global capitalism, determining consequences long before governments enacted policy. Corporations designed strategies, assuming British judges would interpret contractual intent with remarkable commercial sensitivity. Thus, decisions in London reshaped boardrooms in Tokyo, mines in Africa, and shipping firms in South America simultaneously. Every major financial crash revealed a deeper truth about Britain's legal supremacy across international markets decisively. When crises erupted, investors sought stability anchored not in governments, but in trusted judicial interpretation historically. London offered continuity, giving markets confidence that disputes would be resolved quickly, fairly, and economically rationally. Thus, even chaos operated under rules set indirectly by British courts, guiding global reaction mechanisms carefully. The more interconnected global finance became, the more indispensable British adjudication grew, resolving unexpected entanglements. Derivative disputes spanning continents depended on interpretations grounded in precedents stretching back generations consistently. No other judiciary possessed historical depth sufficient to decode modern financial innovation with balanced clarity. Thus, Britain became the translator between tradition and innovation, guiding capitalism through complexities other nations feared. Corporations realized arbitration under English law provided predictability absent elsewhere, where rulings varied dramatically between jurisdictions. Arbitration centers in London expanded rapidly, offering expertise tailored to multi-billion-dollar conflicts requiring sophisticated reasoning. Private hearings ensured confidentiality while retaining rigorous standards that mirrored public court expectations precisely. Thus, London delivered efficiency and discretion, empowering global corporations to resolve disputes without destabilizing markets unnecessarily. Energy companies embraced London's legal system because contracts involving pipelines, oil fields, and offshore drilling demanded certainty. These deals spanned decades, requiring stable interpretation immune to political transitions, wars, or shifting ideological climates. Only British courts offered a jurisprudence strong enough to survive global volatility without distorting contractual meaning. Thus, Britain became the empire of long-term commitments, arbitrating the world's most valuable energy agreements silently. Sovereign nations entered arbitration reluctantly, realizing defaulting on contracts invited legal battles within London's jurisdiction. Even powerful states feared rulings that could freeze assets, restrict borrowing, or damage international credibility instantly. Thus, Britain's courts govern not just corporations, but countries, enforcing obligations shaped by centuries of commercial law. The money courts became the great equalizer, a realm where even superpowers obeyed judicial logic unconditionally. As technology advanced, disputes grew more complex, involving cyber breaches, digital currencies, algorithmic trading, and data flows. Yet British judges learned these systems with discipline, interpreting code, digital risk, and automated contracts skillfully. Their rulings influenced how tech giants structured operations and compliance frameworks across multiple continents simultaneously. Thus, Britain's legal mind extended into cyberspace, adapting imperial logic to digital reality with seamless evolution. London law firms became global empires in their own right, employing armies of solicitors, mastering complex commercial ecosystems. Their influence extended across mergers, acquisitions, sovereign debt restructurings, and multilateral trade agreements internationally. Through them, British legal methodology infiltrated governments, corporations, courts, and financial institutions everywhere silently. Thus, law firms acted as Britain's modern colonial administrators, exporting jurisprudence instead of political authority globally. International investors demanded English law clauses because enforceability directly influenced investment safety and asset valuation. A contract governed by English law became more valuable than identical terms under weaker or unpredictable jurisdictions. Thus, capital flowed toward agreements reflecting British jurisprudence, strengthening London's invisible control over global finance. The empire didn't collapse, it simply shifted from land to language, from borders to binding clauses. Shipping disputes continued reinforcing London's importance as maritime law adapted to containerization and globalized logistics. Judges interpreted collisions, port responsibilities, environmental liabilities, insurance conflicts, and contractual ambiguities rigorously. Every ruling updated the world's understanding of responsibility across supply chains operating at unprecedented international scale. Thus, Britain continued governing oceans indirectly, shaping maritime behavior without a ship bearing its flag anywhere. Financial shocks, such as the 2008 crisis, demonstrated that markets still relied on British courts to resolve derivative disputes. Complex instruments required judges capable of dissecting transactions involving trillions of dollars with academic precision. London delivered clarity, enabling banks to navigate restructuring, settlement, and accountability without collapsing systemic stability. Thus, even modern crises reinforce Britain's foundational role in the architecture of global capitalism. Corporations built headquarters in London not for tax benefits alone, but for proximity to reliable legal expertise. They valued a judiciary insulated from political interference and exceptionally skilled in commercial strategy interpretation. Thus, London became a sanctuary for global business operations, providing a legal climate unmatched in sophistication. The city's skyline displayed financial power, but its foundation lay deeper in jurisprudential capability. Foreign governments sought British judges for constitutional, commercial, and regulatory reforms within their own territories. They requested guidance drafting laws that aligned with global expectations formed through British precedents historically. Thus, nations voluntarily imported pieces of Britain's legal DNA, embedding imperial logic inside their domestic systems gradually. This intellectual infiltration became Britain's most enduring strategic achievement, shaping governance far beyond empire's demise. The more digital the world became, the more valuable historical stability appeared, anchoring innovation to trusted interpretation, smart contracts, automated obligations. Yet disputes still required human judgment rooted in centuries of legal philosophy. Thus, modern technology strengthened Britain's relevance, proving that automation couldn't replace interpretive stability reliably. Legal tradition became the backbone supporting digital transformation, enabling evolution without sacrificing global trust. London arbitration hubs expanded influence across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, resolving disputes involving major infrastructure projects. Belt and road conflicts, energy pipelines, mining concessions, and port leases all returned to British legal principles eventually. Even when settlements occurred elsewhere, arbitration rules mirrored those developed in London's commercial institutions consistently. Thus, Britain governed global development indirectly, ensuring infrastructure followed legal frameworks shaped by imperial legacy. Corporations feared courts in other jurisdictions, where political motives could distort rulings and undermine contractual certainty. They preferred Britain because judgments weren't ideological, emotional, or dependent on government influence or bribery. This impartiality became a priceless commodity in a world driven by complex international investment flows. Thus, London became the fortress of fairness, the one courtroom where money trusted judgment above all else. As geopolitical tensions intensified, nations weaponized trade, tariffs, and financial restrictions to weaken opponents deliberately, but corporations still resolved conflicts through British arbitration, trusting neutral expertise over political retaliation strategies. Thus, Britain mediated economic warfare, ensuring global commerce maintained stability despite diplomatic hostilities. This quiet stabilizer role granted Britain strategic relevance disproportionate to its physical size or economic capacity. Britain's greatest advantage lay in predictability. The legal system functioned like a sophisticated machine of interpretation. Cases referenced centuries of reasoning, giving judges a vast library of intellectual tools unavailable elsewhere. This historical continuity produced judgments with deep philosophical grounding rather than superficial or reactive logic. Thus, rulings felt inevitable, not arbitrary, proving British jurisprudence shaped outcomes before disputes even began. The money courts became the world's trusted referees because they represented more than law. They embodied economic order. Markets required consistency, contracts required enforcement, capitalism required reliability, all delivered through London. Thus, Britain retained global authority even when military power, territorial influence, and political dominance declined significantly. Its legacy survived in how the world resolved conflict, not how it conquered land or controlled seas. Today, billions move across borders through contracts governed by English law, binding nations and corporations together. Every agreement signals trust in Britain's intellectual architecture, proving empire still exists in invisible form. It resides not in maps, but in documents, not in rulers, but in rules, not in armies, but in interpretation. The money courts remain Britain's quiet crown, the throne upon which global capitalism still kneels willingly. If this story changed how you see power hidden inside legal words, remember, real empires survive through systems, not flags. Subscribe for more untold histories shaping global finance, because the next judgment may already be rewriting the world.